Welcome to Sales Talk for CEOs. I'm glad you're here. I'll be interviewing CEOs who have successfully scaled their B2B sales organization. In each episode, I'll start by uncovering the sales background of each CEO, dig into the strategies they use to build their sales organization, and wrap it up with what the future holds. We'll cover the good, the bad, and the ugly of scaling a sales organization. I'm your host, Alice Hyman. Welcome to the Expert series of Sales Talk for CEOs. You know, since August of 2021, I've been interviewing CEOs who have a business-to-business complex sale, and we're learning about their journey of how they started their company and how they built their sales, and in some cases, how they scaled. But what I decided to add in was talking to experts who could help CEOs really grow faster and really go from that incremental growth to that exponential growth. So I'm excited today because I have Richard Medcalf from Xquadrant, and that's exactly what he focuses on. But he and I both know the big problem is CEOs need to be freed up if they're going to focus on getting that exponential sale. So, Richard, welcome to the show.
Yeah, hi Alice, it's great to be here. Thanks for having me.
So, in your own words, tell us all a little bit about what Xquadrant does.
Sure. Well, let me explain the problem that gets me out of bed in the morning, which is really, all around me, I see really high-performing leaders. They've got a great track record, right? They've made big things happen. And I know that there's always a next level, right? We get to a certain level in our careers or in our business, and it's been great, and people are impressed looking at it. It's like, wow, you're the CEO, you're the founder, whatever, you've done all this stuff. And yet somehow we know, yeah, but now what I got here is not going to get me to the next level. And what I'd love doing is in the business is really working with super high achieving founders, CEOs, execs, or their teams, to help them think more strategically and act more influentially, to kind of reinvent that success formula. To say, what's the stretch that's going to take me from what I call your default future, which might be great, but into that preferred future, which is going to require something extra from you, something different. And that's really what we do. So I work one-on-one with CEOs and founders and execs. I work with their teams. I have a CEO mastermind where we can bring together some of the world's top CEOs. But it's always the same thing, right? It's always about how do we get out of this kind of comfort zone of being busy, but actually quite incremental growth? And how do we take the brakes off to release impact to a new level? I'm talking too much. I love this stuff. It's about impact. I love the word impact.
Yeah, I love that too, Richard. The impact is important, and everybody wants to make a different impact, and that's fine. And for some, what might be a huge impact could be a smaller impact to someone else. So it's really just about the impact that CEO and their team want to make, whatever that is, but freeing them up to do it. Now, I work with a lot of CEOs in that SMB area. They're between maybe 10 and 100 million in revenues, and they really want to double in size. They want to scale. A lot of times they have pressure from stakeholders, investors, or sometimes they're a family company and they're getting pressure, right, from everyone to really start scaling. And these companies, these are not startups. They're 10, 15, 20 years old, and they've done well. They have progressed, incrementally. But there's always some sort of trigger event or something happening that makes them really stop and say, all right, here's what we've been doing all these years. We want to do something different. We want to take on an investor. We want to get into a new market. We want to exit at some point in the not too distant future. And so we've got to stop growing incrementally and start growing exponentially so that we can show our value, right? Elevate their sales to increase their valuation. That's what I always say. Right. But Richard, these CEOs are usually so bogged down in the day to day. They wear so many hats, they're managing too many people, they're still solving problems that they should have hired someone else to solve. So let's talk about how
Yeah.
we get them out of that and into a place where they can be more creative, more strategic, and solving the problems at a higher level rather than working in their business
Yeah.
and doing what somebody else really should be doing for them.
Yeah, absolutely. Exactly. And this is why I find I always start working with my clients on this topic. It always seems to be the case. It doesn't have to be, but it's the blocker, right? Because until you've created space, it's hard to get to the next level of activities. I often say when you're looking to multiply your impact, which for me is financial impact, impact on on your market, and also impact on your people. But when you're looking to make that difference, there's always a limiting factor, and that limiting factor can be with you. There's always a limiting factor for you personally, and I
Mhm.
always say that's either your commitment, as in you've not really quite bought into this yet. You say you want it, but you're not quite sure you want it deep down, so there's something holding you back. Or there's attention. I think that's what we're going to talk about now, which is where am I actually putting my focus and my effort and my time. Is that at the right level, or am I limiting myself by focusing on the wrong things? And then
Yeah.
there's and then
So,
there's just two others. Sorry, just so you perhaps just finish, and
yeah,
then you
yeah.
can bounce off. But so you've got this commitment, you've got this attention, you've got the action, which is, do I have the skills, um, and or do I have the influence, right? And there's always like a limiting factor in one of those areas. But when I start to sit down with any exec, really, they almost, not always, but almost always, they gravitate first of all on, you know what? It's my attention. I'm bogged down. I'm in operational overload. My
Yeah.
team are coming to me. I'm the bottleneck. They don't seem to work without me. My diary's full.
Yes.
It's that pain, right? And I see that all the time.
Don't you find, though, I mean, all those factors being true, that what's really limiting them is their mindset and the way they're thinking about things?
So yeah, so there's a few. So I always talk about. So I talk about a few things, right? There's a tactical part. There's an influence part, there's a mindset part, and there's an environment part to all of this.
Mm,
Okay, but you're right. Mindset is so key. Let me give you an example. I was working with an executive. It wasn't actually CEO. It was somebody who was just brought onto the C-suite of a really large company, 7,000 employees, 20 markets.
yeah.
Um, Really impressive individual. And the CEO who I'd been working with asked me to come in and help this person on board onto the executive team. And we were working together. It was going really well. He was launching some transformational projects. And at one point, he comes to me and says, Richard, I'm not getting to enough time on these projects that I want to do. We started off really well. I'm really excited about them. They're going to make a huge difference. But I'm getting bogged down in my emails and everything else. And can you give me a tip? And I always say to clients, like when they want me for a tip, they're paying me far too much money just to get a tip.
Right.
So I say, look, something else is going on. You don't need a tip. You could Google the tip. It's not the tip you need. But tell me a bit more about what's going on. So he explains, I get so many people need me and they're asking me for things. I want to be a good team player. I don't want to let them down. I want to be reliable and trustworthy. Good team player. I don't want to be that person, you have to remind and everything else, who's a bottleneck. But he says, but that means that, I'm forever dealing with all this and I don't get time for what I really want to focus on. So I stop and I say, so tell me one thing. So I get that, but tell me one thing. If the CEO was in the room, what would he want? Oh, well, he want me to focus on these big transformational projects. They're going to make a big difference. Okay, what about the customers? Oh, well, yeah, customers, they really,
Yeah.
well, they won't say it directly because it's an internal project, but they really want, if they knew the amount of time we're going to free up for our employees to actually focus on them, of course, they definitely want this. Great. What about the shareholders? Oh yeah, well they know the impact this is going to have. Great. What about the team? Oh, the team, they're desperate to have a more modern environment in which to work and less admin and everything else. So I said, okay, so at which point I'm going to put it to you that when you are doing your emails, you're actually being untrustworthy, unreliable, and
Right.
not a team player because you're not doing what you get
Right.
paid the big bucks for. And at that point, he had his mindset shift. It was like, you're right. I'm playing a different game now. And,
Right.
as CEO, it's so tempting to get into the operations. It's your comfort zone. You know how to do that. You know how to add value by sorting out this problem or that problem. But
Right.
if you don't focus on the needle moving parts of the business, the long-term vision, the strategy, the go-to-market strategy, if you're not making sure that you are really leveling those things up, who is? And so often we get bogged down in the minutiae. So you're absolutely right. Mindset is one of the key places to go.
Well, what I find is that it's a lack of communication, and it's more than that. It's a lack of understanding how to properly communicate. So, if this is what I am charged to do, make things better, easier, faster for this group of people or this entire company, and I communicate that clearly to the people who work for me. These are my priorities. This is what I am tasked with getting done. And this is how I will proceed with getting it done. If that communication is done really clearly up front, then I can say to everyone who reports to me and who needs my time, remembering what I'm tasked to do, ask yourself, is this the best
Mm,
time? Is this the best person to ask? Is there another way I could get this solved before you come to me?
mm,
And that communication can really help because people don't even think about that. I mean, it's the oddest thing, Richard, the way people think about their boss. It's almost like their boss is their parent. They run to them for everything that they just don't know how to do yet, right?
right.
And we really
But
want to take that away, but the only way we can do it is by clearly communicating. This is what I do. I'm charged to do it and I need to get it done. This is what you do. And when you have trouble doing that, here are all your paths. One, think through it on paper, write it out, see if you can come up with the answer. Two, ask a peer. Three,
mm, mm,
go to the subject matter expert, but give them another channel so they don't have to come to you. And then say, and only come to me when you've exhausted these other possibilities and you truly
mm,
need me to either help sort it out or to
mm,
just make a definitive decision. That way they know what to do and how to use their senior person
right.
properly. The
Yeah.
other
So
thing, yeah, go
if I can
ahead.
just say, Ale, yeah, one thing that you're really speaking to there is it's what I call one of the core principles I tell my clients is stop trying to free up time. And they're like, what do you mean stop trying to free up time? But what I mean by that is stop trying to free yourself up for things, but focus on freeing yourself up. Sorry, stop trying to free yourself up from things, free yourself up for better activities.
Right.
So that's
So
what
the
you
things you
said,
say no to allow you to say yes to the
right?
things that are important.
Yeah, so what do you want to say yes to? I mean, one of my clients, one of the CEOs who came on my own podcast, I have a podcast called The Impact Multiplier CEO, and I talk about these kind of issues. And one of the guests who later became a client said, I became a master in delegation overnight. I was like, well, that's interesting. How did you do that? Oh, he
Had,
said,
yeah.
it's really easy. He said, my wife became seriously ill and went into
Oh,
hospital.
right.
So it was clear he had a high value task, which was taking care of his wife. And so everything else, the excuses were gone. He knew what he had to
Right.
do.
That's right.
And and I think what happens is you're absolutely right about creating agreements with your team and explaining. And I often say, often you get this tables turn situation where the CEO is being Sherlock Holmes, trying to figure out what his team needs from him and what are the facts and what have you looked at, and that the team are coming with these half-baked requests that the CEO has
Yeah.
to go into
Yeah.
detective mode to
Right.
solve.
Exactly.
But so that's absolutely right. You need to sort that part out.
Yeah.
But if you're not already really clear in yourself that actually
Right.
you don't want to do that anymore, because that's the first shift is to go, you know what? I know I can add value by telling people and I get a buzz out of it, but there's an internal game. One of my clients, he said the other day, he said, we just started working together. He said, I know I need to be focusing on the strategic things, but I almost feel guilty when I lock myself in a room or in a meeting to work on those long-term things because I know that there's people out in operations who might be needing me. And he says it's visceral, and intellectually I know I should be
Yes.
doing it, but there's this part of me which is like, yeah, but I'm letting these people down, and I think it's reshifting that that mindset to say, no, no, this is what a CEO I'm charged with. I need to be focusing on sales, on strategy, on the structural
Yeah.
components. And it's when you really embrace that, and it might not be your comfort zone, but that's your job as CEO.
Well, it's a really hard problem because I really feel like they need me, right? When I'm, putting myself in a spot where they can't bother me and I'm trying to get my work done. But the reason I think that happens is because we don't properly train people. Back to the communication. So first of all, you cannot free yourself up if you have not trained everyone to do their job properly, and if you have not trained them how to solve something without you, right? So we expect that. And so what I see a lot of CEOs doing is what I call abdicating when they should be delegating. And then by abdicating, they prove to themselves without a doubt that the people cannot do what they need them to do
Yeah.
because they've abdicated. So
Well,
I think,
actually, I think that just to weigh in on that, I think that there's two things that go on. There's an abdication that you mentioned, which is exactly right. One of the things that I often say to people wanting to delegate is create a checklist. Imagine that I was going to
yes,
email you with the result and say, by the way, that job you asked to be done, it's been done. Here's the outputs. And like, what's the minimum email that I need to send you for you to go, I don't need to know anymore. It's fine. If we have, set up the new CRM and everyone knows how to use it and people are using it and blah, 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 and blah, 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 then I'm good. I don't need to know. I need to look at it. I'm good.
right.
If those 5 bullet points are satisfied, I'm good. And I think when you spend like 10 minutes writing that out and getting really clear about what success looks like, what the completed project is, you really write it down, then that becomes a great tool for delegation. And I think often the abdication comes where it's not even clear to people what success looks like. But the other thing I wanted to add, Alice, is there's that, which is you don't train people,
Yeah.
and you don't even train yourself to give people what they
Right.
need. But there's also the opposite. You actually train them very often to have the opposite behavior. So
Yes.
so you actually train people to not make a decision because you make the decisions because it's easier. If you make it,
Right.
they are off the hook.
That's right.
And you get the buzz and they get the kind of sense of, great, I just have to do that now. I don't have to think anymore. And you create this. I see it all the time. And even almost the more
Yeah.
impressive the individual leader is, the more tempting it is for them to do this because they're smart, they know how to problem solve, they know how to go fast, and that impatience leads them to make the decision. So I'd have to say, go on a decision um, amnesty. Like, don't refuse
Yeah.
to make any decisions for the
Push
next
it back
week.
to them and say, what decision would you make and why?
Yeah,
Push
what
it
would you
back to them.
recommend? Yeah, exactly. So
Yeah.
what's your recommendation
Yeah.
on this? And
I,
unless the
I
decision's absolutely crazy, go with it. Simple as
I
that,
think
and
it's
move on.
hard because they don't always have the right team. And so what I find with a lot of CEOs, especially who are founders, they're very smart and they're very quick. And so, like, I will say to them, if I put you in a room with 100 other people, you'd be smarter than 98 of them. And I don't just mean smarter intellectually, but smarter sometimes with your EQ or faster with the way you can decide, or you have more knowledge or experience. And so if you look at your own team and you say, there's 100 people here,
Mm.
and two of us,
Yeah.
are able to do all the things and do them quickly and have the knowledge and the experience and everything. So of course, it's hard for you to look at all these other people and go, why can't they do what I can do? Why aren't they as smart as me? Why don't they have as much experience as I do? And we don't say that out loud, but we're just thinking, are you kidding
Mm.
me? Why can't you do this?
Wow.
And truly, we have to, as leaders, pull back in and say, okay, I have this set of knowledge and experience and
Mm.
smarts in all these different ways. I'm not better than anybody else. I just have this body of knowledge and this way that I can do things. It's my job now to make sure that everyone else can perform at their best. And in the beginning, that may not be very good,
Mm.
but I can level them up. And if we can't level them up as a team, then they don't belong on our team. But I find that CEOs are so bogged down doing so many things because they allow people to work for them that continue to not level up, even though they've been given the
Mm.
opportunity. So there's really two pieces there. Like, did you give them the opportunity and the tools and the training to level up?
Mm.
And did they do it? Or did you not give them that and they're not doing it? And you're still looking at them like they should know.
Well,
So,
yeah,
I
I
mean,
think that's the
right?
point. Yeah, I think you're right. I think
Yeah.
um, I have yeah, one CEO I'm in contact with, and he often says this. You know, my team that it's like, yeah, I'd love to get more into strategy and and operations, but you know what, my team aren't where they're meant to be at. To which I said, well, hang on, you've been in your role 18 months. If you don't have a right team around you,
Yeah.
right, and you're probably going to be here for what, 3 4 years, given this particular business, like you've used half your time and you haven't got your key team in place. What's going on, right? What gives? It's a bit different, I know, when you're the founder and you build something up, but even so, you have to decide. You can't live with this as some kind of chronic pain. You either, as you said, give people a chance. Often we don't give people a chance because we're making the
No.
decisions for them,
Right.
um, and we don't put the pressure on just that enough for them to realize that it's time for them
Right.
to step up. So sometimes we don't really give them a chance. We think we are, and then we kind of get fed up. And like I say, you get a pot plant. You don't give it sun and water and
Right.
nutrients. You stick it under the table, it dies, and you go, well, this is a bad plant. You buy another one, you put it back under the table. So you have to give people what they need to thrive.
Right.
But at some point, if you've been clear about what you need and they're not responding, you do have to make a leadership decision about that, right?
Yes.
Because the business depends on it.
That's right. I say level them up or let them go. And that doesn't mean you personally have to level them up, but you have to provide the environment and the
Mm,
resources and the
mm,
mentors or whatever is needed. Level them up or let them go. And until you do that, you will never get freed up to
mm,
focus on what's important. And so your business may continue to grow, right? Incrementally,
mm,
with some, rough patches or
mm.
some flat quarters, but it will continue to grow. But when you really get ready to scale, you've got to have that right team around you that knows how to make decisions, support you as a CEO, and help the company really soar. So let's talk, Richard, about some of the key factors that have to be in place to go from incremental growth to exponential growth.
Yeah. Okay. Well, there's a huge thing. So I think the first thing is, um, I think the first thing you have to have as a CEO is really that commitment to what are we trying to do here, right? And and for me, you can come up with your financial numbers, and that's fine. But I want to say, like, it doesn't it doesn't motivate people, right? Past a certain level. So I'm always trying to say, like,
Right.
do you know what is so freaking awesome that everyone's going to be jumping out of bed in the morning, right? So do you have that? And and often we don't really articulate it in that way. We're not always really clear about why do we want to go exponential. Exponential is actually tough, right? Behind you it looks
Yeah.
flat, in front of you it looks vertical. The
Right.
challenges are going to be completely different. And I think that's the first thing is to be really, really clear about why you want this and what you want.
Right.
I think the second thing is you've got to realize you've got to start doing next year's job and not last year's job. In exponential, next job is going to be 10 times different. So I'd have to say, imagine you're already there. Imagine you are the leader who's running a company that's got 10 times more employees, 10 times more revenues,
Yeah.
10 times more offices. Just imagine that. Imagine that.
10
And that,
times more sales
yeah,
that have to be delivered upon.
right. There we go. So you got delivery, exactly, sales and delivery. And then and think about, well, imagine that it wasn't you that did it. Imagine that you won the lottery or something and retired, and somebody else came in, they took on the CEO role, and they and they did their thing, and then you met up with them, or you met up with an old colleague 2 years later. He said, you know what? When you left, it was amazing. This CEO guy came in, absolutely nailed it. We've 10x'd. It's awesome. And blah blah blah. He really rattles off the vision. Basically, we're all super pumped. We're really clear. We're motivated. We've got a cohesive team. Our sales has never been stronger. Customers are satisfied. All the rest of it. And you go, wow, how did he do that? Well, how did she do that? And then that person turns around and they tell you, well, they did this. So I like to ask my clients, like, what are they going to tell you? What did that
That's
leader
right.
do? How did they show up?
Yeah,
How did they interact with their team? What leadership move? What changes did they make to the leadership team? Where do they spend their focus? How do they organize their
right,
day? And then, so generally they have good ideas. The client, people will say, oh yeah, well, they didn't get distracted by the operational stuff. They're really firm. They held people to account. They challenge
right.
people where necessary. They spent time looking at the market, the future, whatever it is, right? They'll list out a few things, and then the question's
Yeah,
simple, right? It's like, well, be that person.
right.
That's the person you need to start being today, and that's where the fun starts.
Absolutely. And if you want others to change, you have to change yourself first. I always say the only person I can change is myself. That is your mantra, CEO. The only person I can change is myself. I cannot change other people. But when I change, they see that change and they will change around me, or they won't. And then they won't be part of this team anymore. So it's really important for CEOs to be able to look at themselves and vision what they want and become that. Act as if, even if you're not there yet, right? Act as if and work towards that vision. But I do agree with you that many CEOs are going to be stuck in that incremental because they're looking backwards instead of looking forwards. And they haven't spent the time visioning what it will be like 3, 5, 10 years from now. What will the
Well,
leader of that new team that has exponential growth, what will that look like, right? And I think it's important as we vision all of that to stay focused on the sales piece, but not in terms of sell more, in terms of how do we provide an exceptional customer experience
mm,
to most everyone who comes in contact with us, whether they buy or not. And if we start to reshape and reform around that to get the exponential growth,
mm.
I think we can go so much faster because now instead of looking inward, of course we're going to have to change things internally. That's a given. Of course we'll have to do that. But we
Well,
might make the wrong changes if we don't look at our company from the customer's point of view, what their journey is, where they encounter us on that journey, and whether or not we're providing an exceptional experience to them at every point where they meet us in that journey. And I think that is something that every CEO really has to consider. And again, that may be a mindset shift.
well, I think it's coming from it's really looking at the fundamentals of your business, because I've got one client, his business is a $300 million valuation business, I would say, and he wants to 10x it, 3 billion. And it's definitely doable, but I challenged him because I was like, well, valuation is an outcome,
Right.
right? It's a result of something else, right? So what's going to change? Like, how are you going to wow your customers 10 times more? How are you going to deliver 10 times more value, right, into the market? Like, because valuation is from value, right? But value is first of all what the value that you create in the world,
Right.
right? So you can do a bit of financial engineering probably, and there'll be a few things you can kind of get. But in terms of actual, like, what are the new experiences you're going to create for customers? How are you going to improve and meet their needs, right? And that's, I think, a better place to come from. Is what you're saying. Really start with that customer journey, or the customer needs that you want to satisfy, and work
Yeah.
back. You also mentioned that this whole area around I suppose the stretch of doing this and visioning it and perhaps finding it easier to think about the past and the future or the near future than the longer term. There's three things I find are really, really important in anyone. And you said you can't change others until you've changed yourself, right? You can't change your business until you've up leveled yourself. And I think it's so true. We get who we are first of all. And
Yeah.
so I always say there's three elements that kind of create an inevitable environment, right? If you want to level up, there's three elements you need in place. The first one is insight. Like who's going to speak to you in a way that creates fresh insights, that pushes your thinking, that gets you
Yeah.
out of your own little bubble. Most CEOs, they get yes men all around them, people who are going to say what they think. So you need who's provoking your insight and
Yeah.
pushing your thinking and getting you to see your blind spots.
Yeah, and
Second,
that's not usually your immediate team, your direct reports. Some of
no.
them, you might get lucky and get someone who feels, you're equal and will push you, but usually you need an outside force, either a mentor, a
Well,
peer, another CEO that you're friends with, or a
somebody.
CEO group, or a coach, something, somebody who's really going to look
Yeah.
after you, your well-being, your development, and push you.
Yeah, and you might need multiple ones for multiple things, different perspectives, because I think what you need most of all is to push your creativity. That's why somebody too close, like they might be in your team, they might have good input, but they're also pretty close to the situation
Of
as well.
course.
So,
Yeah.
so the insights is one piece. I think the accountability is the other piece, because it's one thing to decide you want to lose some weight, or go to the gym. It's another thing to actually make it happen, right? And so often we can have
Yeah.
the insight, but how do we actually implement that? And I think sometimes when everything else going on, we can have more ideas than we can ever actually embed. And
Yeah.
so making sure there's some link there. So who's going to keep you accountable, or who do you
Well, and
actually
most of us,
speak
not
to that
all of
about?
us, need some cheerleading in that accountability, right? So we set our goal, we say we want to do it, we figure out a
Yeah,
plan to actually do it, and someone holds us accountable, and then we want them to cheer for us when we
yeah,
do well, right?
yeah,
So not
absolutely.
everybody needs that, but most of us do.
Absolutely, absolutely, and yeah, and then the last point and you mentioned it earlier, is community, right? So who are the people you're surrounding yourselves with, who are also playing a big game, playing a bigger game than you? You don't want to be. You said, you perhaps you're in the top two people in the room. Well, if you're the smartest person in the room, you're in the wrong room,
Right.
right? So what's the room you're going to be in where you're like, wow, these people around me now, I'm going to
That's
learn a
right.
ton from them. And so for me, it's like if you get that environment right, we've got insight, accountability, and a community that's kind of pushing you up, then actually you'll just instinctively start to dream bigger, realize you need to be more strategic, go for bigger goals, have more
Yeah.
fun when you're doing it. I think it's really important. It's hard to make it all come up from your own sheer willpower.
Absolutely. And I find, the CEOs that I talk to, they really want to scale their sales. Most of them want exponential growth. Some of them just want something in between, um, incremental and exponential, but they want it to be more than it is today. And when I ask them if they're really prepared for that, they dig into it. The answer is almost always no. They want it, but if they start after it without preparing first, it can really be pretty disastrous in some cases. And I
Mm.
have seen some companies who went for the exponential growth because they had sales set up in a way that sales went zoom, but internally they weren't
Mm.
ready for it. And so they were just disappointing their customers. That's not what we want. If we're going for giving an exceptional customer
Hmm.
experience to people,
Yeah,
we don't want to just sell a whole bunch and then everything implodes because we can't deliver it or deliver it well or
yeah.
onboard properly or all of those other things. So it really is something that leaders have to think about on their own with their team. If we are going to go from incremental to exponential, what are all the things that we need to consider? And how do we need to better train ourselves first
Mm.
and then train our teams so that we can do it? And of course, everybody wants to hurry. But I always say that by slowing down and taking care of these things first on the front end, you can speed up the back end tremendously. And then you do end up getting what you want and usually in the time you want it, if you'll stop and prepare first.
Yeah. Yeah. I talk about using time or investing time. So using time is when you're just doing the same old things,
Yeah.
um, operationally, keeping the lights on, making the same old kind of kinds of decisions. And investing time is where you actually put your focus on things which are going to make
Yeah.
everything easier in the future and take you onto that different trajectory. So that I think that's where that slowing down to speed up comes in. It's where you actually invest
Yeah.
your time, your effort, your attention in order to create something new in the business, create a new
Yeah.
capability, a new lever, and also that systems thinking. When you have time to step back, you start to go, where is the limiting factor right now? What is stopping us? Oh, it's not sales anymore, it's operations. That's the limiting factor. We
Right.
can't actually deliver what we're promising. Okay, that's the next thing to fix. And then,
Yeah.
where's the next issue now? Oh, it's actually it's brand, right? We're not well known enough. We've got the capacity, we've got the sales
Yes.
process. We need to raise that. That's going to be the next lever. But it's really hard to do that when you've got the tunnel vision of being
Right.
stuck in the weeds.
That's right. And
I like to
that's
say
why
you've
I
got a choice.
suggest, yeah,
Yeah.
that leaders get away from the day to day with their team. First of all, by themselves, get away from the day to day by yourself. Just take a day to think and reflect. So, like, here's what we're doing. How are we doing it? Is that working? Do I like the way that's going? Just reflect on everything, right? Then also take the time to bring your team together and talk about what you're doing, how you're doing it, reflect on it, and then decide where you want to go from there. And that has to be phones off. Everybody knows what to do in case of emergency. Do not call us. We're in this room for 2 days or however, 2 half days or however you're going to do it, but not to be interrupted so that you can have that time to be creative and think about things in a different way than you do when you're in them day to day, because otherwise it's going to become really hard for you to move from that incremental to that exponential.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, Richard, it's been just amazing having this conversation with you. Something that all CEOs who want to scale their sales, scale their growth, need to understand these things. And so I appreciate you talking about them. And you mentioned that you may have a few resources, or let us just know how people can get a hold of you if they'd like your help doing this.
Yeah, I think there's a couple of easy places to start. The first one is you might like the podcast, right? The Impact Multiplier CEO podcast. There's a lot of really incredible stories. One of the seasons is called Secrets of Scaling, and I talked to
Ah,
the Financial Times top 1,000, well, some of the top 1,000 CEOs in terms of revenue growth, right, in both the US and in Europe. And so it's fascinating to hear those stories of how do they become one of the top 10, top 20 countries in companies in terms of how they've been able to
yeah,
scale. And so that's real kind of on the ground insights. And the other one is there's an email series I put together, just about 5 or 6 emails around this topic of freeing yourself up for more strategic activity. And so I'll make a link to make that easy to get to. If you go to xquadrant.com slash sales talk, then you'll be able to immediately find that. And it's just a
great.
few emails, but they really offer a few kind of counterintuitive ways of thinking about this topic of, you're overloaded with operations. How do you actually create that magical strategic time which you can use to pull the big levers in the business?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thank you so much. I'm excited to share this with everyone, and I'll be writing a blog about it as well to pull out some of the really salient points that people can dig into. So I'll be talking to you again soon, I'm
Yeah.
sure. And
Thanks,
I
Alice.
thank you so much for being on the show.
You're welcome. It's been such a fantastic conversation. Thanks for your insights as well. It's given me food for thought as well.
Thanks for tuning in to Sales Talk for CEOs. You can find me at alicehyman.com. Be sure and connect with me on LinkedIn and let me know that you heard the show. If you found value in today's episode, please subscribe, write a review, and share the show with another CEO.